Ah, good afternoon. I think we call it afternoon if you're on Eastern Daylight Time. Uh, it's a pleasure to be with you all. And today, Cathy and I are going to talk about those first steps. Cathy Pratt, that is. Let me give you her full title so you'll know who you're talking to. She is Director of the Indiana Resource Center for Autism, Indiana Institute on Disability and Community at Indiana University. So, Cathy, can you show us yourself so everybody will know who we're talking to? I don't see your picture.
I don't know if everyone can see me visibly, but
your voice is coming through
I'm sitting here in my office in Bloomington, Indiana. Okay. So I'm sitting here in my office in Bloomington, Indiana. So welcome to the webinar, everyone. And of course, Eustacia needs no introduction. You all know Eustacia, and she is a tremendous woman who has contributed much to the field, both personally and in the form of Temple Grandin. So Eustacia, if you want to start.
Well, yes, I will, Kath. I think what we have to go back to is those first anxious moments when you begin to realize something is seriously wrong with your child. Temple was mute, for starters. She didn't want to play peekaboo. She wouldn't catch my eyes. She didn't grab my beads and try to stick them in her mouth. And she didn't want to be touched. She preferred to play with her spit. She would spit and then go into gales of crazy laughter. And she would play with her feces, pull them out of her diaper and smear it on the wallpaper. Something was seriously wrong. Well, I took the step and took her to Children's Hospital in Boston. We lived outside of Boston in those days, to the Judge Baker Guidance Clinic. I was comforted by the name of that clinic, for starters, because I figured there had to be a judge long ago who set up a fund for the hospital to have a clinic to guide young people, young mothers and their children, before they turned up in court in front of him. And in those days, the court phrase was stubborn child. That's a very dismissive phrase. Dr. Bronson Crothers was head of that clinic, and he was very kindly congenial. He examined Temple, and the general feeling was, he said something like, well, she's certainly a very odd little girl. And he showed me how to play games with her. And on our second visit together, he said he would like to have Temple come in to Children's Hospital for a 10-day visit. Now, I've never talked about this before publicly. My anxiety at this, I don't know that I've told anybody about those 10 days. That's a hard step to take. I had to trust Dr. Carruthers with my child for 10 days. I could come in and watch her through a one-way mirror, but I could not touch her or be with her. And I think, curiously, I don't think Temple minded. She liked the little red bed that she was sleeping in there. But this brings up the first question I wanted to bring to you, Cathy, and that is, how do you, forgive me for putting on glasses, I just want to check my name. Question here. How do you support parents who are still in denial about their child's potential diagnosis? Cathy, are you there?
Eustacia, I think during your time, I'm here. There's just a delay. Eustacia, I think that during your time it was very different. For you, there were no real options. There were not all the diagnosticians around the country who were looking at an autism spectrum diagnosis. And today the issue is different for families is that there are a lot of professionals out there who are looking at and diagnosing autism spectrum disorders. I think what happens now is that families oftentimes, the first person they go to is their family physician. And the family physician, depending on their knowledge of autism or not, will recommend to the families either wait or else to pursue a diagnosis, or hopefully they will do some screening.
Let me just add the thought there. I told Temple's pediatrician that I was going to do this, and he was rather dismissive that first time round. He said, well, you can take her to Children's Hospital if you want to, but I think you're just an anxious mother. And I've heard that story from other mothers, that they're, the first time round, maybe they're right, I don't know, they're dismissive. What's your experience with that?
I think some parents still find that physicians are dismissive, and some of them give families false information. But I hope that as we're promoting early awareness and identification, that families who are having less of that experience, unfortunately, Eustacia, families still have some of the same experiences that you have, where they are told things like, institutionalize your child, or, you know, this child will be difficult for you for the rest of your life. But I'm hoping that more and more we have enlightened physicians, and I know that we do, who are willing to look seriously at the diagnosis of autism. I think, you know, one of the things that is a word that's important in this question is the question about denial. And I think for me, when families are in denial, I don't know how to get anyone out of denial. I think that what we do is that we present information, and that we know that each parent moves along at their own pace, and they accept reality in their own way. And I think just keeping to feed them information until they get to the point where they're ready to hear that information is really critical. Eustacia?
Yes? I'm still having a little trouble hearing you, Cathy. So, Chris, are you picking up on Cathy's words? Because I'm having trouble hearing her. I don't think she can hear me. Well, gracious, Cathy, I'll have to just move on to my next thought, which was that Temple was diagnosed as autistic, and in those days it was called infant schizophrenia, a pretty desperate title to have to swallow. But again, I'm so grateful to this kindly doctor who I did trust, because then he said, well, I think Temple's going to learn to talk, but let's speed up the process. And he told me who to go to. Mrs. Reynolds in Belmont, Massachusetts. Mrs. Reynolds ran a little nursery school in the basement of her house, where she took children who had trouble speaking. Temple allowed Mrs. Reynolds to touch her, to grab her jaw. She would grab her jaw. She would tell her where to put her tongue, where the T was versus the D. And Temple let her do that. And I think this was because Temple really did want to talk. And as we all know, she hasn't stopped talking ever since. So that began to work. The other thing that Mrs. Reynolds did, which I realize now I didn't understand at all when I was young. I was learning these things as I went along. But Temple had to sit in her chair. There were other little children there who were also having trouble with their speech. She had to sit and wait her turn. It was the first time she began to understand that she would have to share the world with other people, and that they were going to be part of her life. That's the first step for a lot of children, don't you find, Cathy, who are on the spectrum? The first thing is to draw them out of themselves. And I think of the Latin word for educating. It is educare, to lead out. And that's what Mrs. Reynolds did for Temple. the next person, you see, there was a network in those days, and these women were incredibly bright and overqualified because it was before women's lib. And the only jobs that were open to women were teaching, nursing, and stenography. They would now be doctors and heads of whole schools, not running a little school in their basement. But by the time Temple was approaching 5, she finally learned to talk, and Mrs. Reynolds turned Temple over to Mrs. Huckle. Mrs. Huckle was British. She ran a little camp in a wooded area of Massachusetts. And she said, Temple, she was very sharp with her, you may come to my camp. And here's where expectation began to take place with Temple. But at the end of the summer, Mrs. Huckle said, you must have learned 2 things. You must learn to say the Lord's Prayer, and you must learn always to do your very, very best. Well, it was many years before I realized the importance of Temple learning that prayer, that the 2 requests in it were something I'd have to work with myself. It only asks for today's bread. No IEP, just today we'll work with. And it asks us to please be forgiven for what we've done wrong, but only if we forgive those who we think have done something wrong to us. Those are 2 very good life rules. And the other one, for Temple to do her very best. She always has. Cathy, what I want to come back to you with is, how does this relate to you in terms of IEP? There were no such things in those days. Do you have a reaction to that?
I think that Eustacia, you did many things wonderfully, and Temple had many wonderful opportunities. Listening to you talk about Temple, you never forced her to do anything. You coerced her. You had high expectations that she would have manners. Temple talks about the fact that you got her involved and all of her siblings in acting out things and in entertaining, which I think was very beneficial. And I think what you're getting to also is the fact that we know that if we can establish a very good rapport with kids, if we can find something that brings in the child's interest, that we can start building a program that will lead to successful adult outcomes. So I think an IEP today, I think things have shifted also. Today the IEPs are looking much more at state standards, and sometimes we've gotten away from some of the things that I think are important in terms of getting kids ready for real life, looking at getting them engaged in careers and opportunities that will help them be successful in the future. And I think those are all things that you were able to do with Temple. I'll pass up to you, Eustacia.
Cathy, can you hear me? This is Chris. Eustacia, I'm going to interrupt for just a second.
Please
Cathy,
do, yes.
and I'm not going to talk about the topic, however. I'm going to talk about Cathy's. Still, people are saying you're still a little bit hard to understand, Cathy, and that's kind of sad because you're saying great stuff. So what I would like you to try to do, if you can, without really frustrating yourself, is not use your headset microphone. Just take that one and tip it up like that, and go to using your microphone on your camera, which means you'll have to go into your controls, disable the headset microphone, and just have the other one on. If you could try that, it'd be great. Okay? Okay, go ahead, Eustacia. Sorry.
No, thank you, because I'm very frustrated in not being able to hear Cathy clearly. So it's hard to pick up on what she said. But I did hear the word consistency in there, I think, and I feel very strongly about that. when the next step after the summer camp for Temple with Mrs. Huckle was in school at the little Dedham Country Day School where they took her. But they said, we will have to work together, was their remark. And Mrs. Deach, who was in charge of the pre-K through 3rd grade, she and I talked almost every day about what Temple was doing. And if that produced consistency, but can I hear? I can't hear you. What?
I can't hear what you. I can't hear you guys. I can't hear you guys.
Can you
Cathy,
hear me?
You can't hear us?
You're getting clearer.
No. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Now it begins to clear up.
Okay.
Do you want to?
I couldn't hear anything you said, Eustacia.
Well, what I'm
Okay.
thinking about now is the combination when Temple started school of a consistency and expectation. Because the teacher and I talked and we're completely united on how to approach Temple. This gave Temple an absolutely consistent day, and then she began to learn that we expected certain things from her. She could carry that out because the setup was consistent. I wondered how I just want to hear your reaction to that. That's where, and now that I can hear you.
You know, I think, okay. You know, for many years I was a school teacher and working with students on the spectrum. And I think the luxury that I had was that I was teaching during a time where there didn't seem to be as much, there wasn't as much autism out there. There wasn't as much litigiousness out there. And honestly, family members and professionals had to be in this together because we didn't have the resources that we do now. And so as a teacher when I was an educator, the family members of the students that I worked with were critical to the educational programming. And we communicated on an ongoing basis. And what I hear from families is that when they have that relationship with professionals, when they trust that professionals will take care of their child, and they trust that the professional likes their child and they will do their very best, that programming can be much more effective. We have a comment below from Carrie Brown that says, what do you do when the school gives up on your child due to frustrations and behaviors? And I think that with the increased incidence of autism and the increasing complexity of some of our students, it becomes so necessary that we build capacity in our schools, and not only build capacity in our schools, but also that our educators and our families have ongoing resources to collaborate, to work together, to problem solve. No one is going to have the answers, and I think we've got to realize that we have to come together as a community to problem solve on behalf of these children. And when schools and families start pointing fingers and start blaming each other for the problems, and I think we don't serve ourselves well. And I think, and I'm going to say this from the side of the professional, we have to have the spirit that none of us have all the answers. We have to have the spirit and understanding that parents are giving their children to us to do our very best on, and we have to go into this with the spirit that together we're going to be much better, do much better work for the child.
That's great.
And
Eustacia?
Eustacia, you had a couple of quotes that I'm putting up there right now, and I don't know if you can see them on your screen or not. But
no,
you
I
said
can't,
there are no answers.
Yes.
Maybe Oliver
that.
can show you where those are.
You see, there are no answers. There are only choices. But choices can be changed. My point about it is that all parents will change them as they change and the child changes. And that's as it should be. I think one of the things that troubled me as I look back is that I hid a great many things because Temple's father and I did not agree about Temple. And this was difficult. This was a serious problem. And so I hid things from him. I don't know that I would recommend that. But I have found that there are other mothers who are doing something very much like that. And the question I wanted was, what to ask you was, what do you do when parents don't agree with each other?
I think, when there's a disagreement about the child, as a professional, we have to approach it from what's going to be in the best interest of the child. And there are processes that we can go through that may help to bring the family and the professionals closer together. And so things like person-centered planning, starting to help the family having a vision about their child, asking the parents to talk about, individually what are their wishes for the child. I think that my sense of it is that anger comes about amongst families when they are afraid. And so giving families some tools and talking, my sense with dads is that, and I may be speaking out of terms, but fathers want to know how to fix things. And so if we can give fathers things that they can fix, or little steps they can take, and mothers feel like a lot of the responsibility falls on them. And so giving them a few things that they can do as well. And I think also giving families the permission to not always focus on their child 1,000% of the time.
I'll say that again, Cathy.
And,
you said to give the parents permission. Could you say it again a little slower because I'm still picking up static? Because that's an important point.
Giving the families permission to take care of themselves, to not always focus on their child with autism 100% of the time. And I think that, Eustacia, you talk about the fact that autism is a whole family condition, that it affects every family member. And I think that we have to support families and give family members permission to realize that and not to feel guilty when they choose to take care of themselves and each other. Because families are in this for the long haul. And if they're going to survive this in the long haul, they have to be able to take care of themselves and of the entire family as a unit.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that. They if they're so focused on their own child, they lose a sense of themselves, of who it is they are. And if they lose a sense of themselves, there's no way for them to help their child to have a sense of themselves and how we come together as social creatures. That's a terribly important point, and I do see a lot of parents, and maybe you do too, who are so focused on their child that they can't have any other life themselves. And I've also noticed, and maybe you have too, what do you do when parents over-enable their child because of this too intense focus? Because I've run into that.
Eustacia, before you go on, Carrie Brown has, I hope she doesn't mind me saying her name, she asked, what can we provide the school to help them with support, to help support them? And I thought maybe you could talk about, being on the board and doing all the things you did to support the school when Temple was young. Not support Temple in the school, but just...
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. I ran the school fair. I put on little shows for the school. I contributed everything that I could, and I was on the school board. And all of this helps. It builds a united relationship between the school and the family. And do you have this, Cathy? I don't know if she's here.
I also responded to Carrie, you know, to provide schools with information and resources. Sometimes professionals feel desperate, and they don't know what to do, and they may not have the support. And honestly, I was very fortunate. My students, their family members, and I were very close, and they supported me during difficult times. And I think that support and really looking at how you build that community around the child is important. And I think also, I tell professionals is that we have to share with families the positive stories about their children. And I think as family members, it's also important to share positive comments with professionals as well. Many public educators feel pretty beaten up these days. And so what I know is that none of us do our very best, either families nor professionals, if we feel like we're being beaten up. So I think, you know, coming together around these child and having a positive working spirit is going to be important.
I also,
Eustacia.
yes, I'm running into families where timidity plays in. They're afraid to make their own judgment of the situation. They feel, oh, the school can solve anything. There's a timidity, particularly here in New York, where we have a lot of ethnic pockets, and maybe they don't speak English that well. And they think, oh well, the school will know what to do, which puts too big a responsibility, it seems to me, on the school. But they are lost. And it isn't so much that they lack a sense of themselves, it's that they are just timid by nature. Do you run into this?
Eustacia?
Yes?
Eustacia, I think we also have to empower parents. I was working with a teacher who did a fabulous job of this. He would send a letter home to all of his students' parents every week, talking about what they had been working on during the week, and saying, we've been teaching your child this skill this week. At home, here's how you can maybe help out teach this skill or promote this skill at home. So I think all of us have to realize that sometimes when we don't act our very worst, or our very best, it's because we're overwhelmed. So giving family members some little tips about things that they can do that are realistic and reasonable can be helpful.
I think there's a real awkward line, I don't really like to call it a fine line, between parents giving professionals so much information that the professionals feel overwhelmed by that as they're working with the child, and then parents not participating enough to let the school know what they want. And so it's very difficult. I mean, parents shouldn't have to deal with knowing how much information to give and how much they should work out, and how much they should listen to the school, but it happens. I mean, they're just a group of people trying to work together. I think that it's real important that when the group isn't working together, and Carrie Brown said, where's that balance? I would always err on the side of your child. So if the school doesn't like what you're doing, or they feel like you're too intrusive, oh well, it is your child and you need to do that because there'll be another teacher next year. So being a good advocate for your child is always a side to err on. But when it gets to be that you're feeling beaten up by the response the school is giving to you, then it's time to back off and just remember that your job is to be a parent to your child and make sure your child has a good childhood, as good as they can. And so I think the balance comes when it starts affecting your home, when what's going on in school starts affecting all the relationships in the home, then you need to back off and just say, okay, we'll let the schools do what they're going to do for a while, and then we'll come back at it maybe in a couple of years or next year when there might be better possibilities. That's just my opinion on that.
No, very good point. I think that I was incredibly lucky. I thought of it many times since. Could I raise Temple today? I don't know. Because it was a very small, close community. And by sweeping her into the little school where all the children were going to school, it swept Temple into the neighborhood. And Temple very soon learned that if she wanted to play with the other kids, she'd have to play by their rules. And we forget sometimes that the children themselves have their own culture, their own set of rules of how they'll play their games. And we have to, or I felt, I would just let Temple go that way. I think always of the camping incident where they decided they wanted to spend the night. And this were various nights where they put up the tent in the field back of our house. And I said to Temple once, whose tent was it? I didn't know where the tent came from. And she said, oh, I don't know. I think it was so-and-so's because she had the biggest allowance and therefore could buy the most candy. And they all pooled their allowance and bought their candy. And I think of letting Temple bike downtown and take her sister with her. I said, now can you take care of your little sister? She doesn't see as well as you do. She's not as steady on a bicycle as you are. Can you do that? Yes, I will take responsibility for her, and we will put our bicycles back at the police station because nobody would take a bicycle from the police station. It was the first responsibility that I gave Temple. I mean, talk about trust. I had to just kind of cross my fingers. But I also had to cross my fingers about the tent out back. I think they took all the flashlights from everybody's house, and I guess they took a lot of blankets. And it didn't rain, and they all survived the night. We have to, it's always made me feel that we have to allow children their own culture. It sure worked for Temple.
Eustacia, this is Cathy. I think this is about taking a reasonable risk. And I also worry that sometimes when I see students who, for example, have staff with them, Velcroed onto them 24/7, or they have a lot of oversight. And I know, families want their children to be safe, but I think that I look at this as a continuum, and that we have to always think about what we're aiming for. So I see some children who have been so heavily staffed during the school years that then when they go into the adult services, they're conditioned to the fact that somebody will always be there to rescue them. Somebody will always be there to prompt them. So I think for every family, this has to be incredibly difficult. I'm not a family member. This has to be difficult. It's knowing how to keep your child safe, but at the same time give them skills and teach them to be as independent as possible so that they're prepared for a successful adult outcome, successful adult life. And as you put it, success as they would define success to be. Success is different for every child. But I think we have to be very careful that we don't overly protect the child into segregated and protect them out of life. Make them so dependent on people that they're protected out of opportunity.
I agree, but I think life is tougher now. We lived in a simple little village. It's become, even Dedham, it's become much more stylish, much more built up, much more suburban, I guess I would call it. And where we summered on the vineyard, in those days the vineyard was a simple little island, not the playground of presidents. So it was easier to feel that our children were safe, and they were safe. And we knew that jointly, and we all of us really brought our children up much in the same way. That was the good side of the 50s. There were many things that weren't good about the 50s, but that was good. Cathy, I wish I could hear you a little more clearly. It's still breaking up for me. Are you hearing her, Chris?
Yeah, there's still a little static. I'm going to get Cathy a new headset, I think, as a birthday present.
Yes.
So I'm thinking that's all it is. It's just, I think there's a short somewhere in her wiring, not internally in you, Cathy, by any means. We have another question, Eustacia, and this probably goes to Cathy. a woman who said they continue to call the police on an 8-year-old. What accommodations can we add to the BIP to avoid escalation of behaviors? Any ideas on that? So, Cathy, maybe you could address writing a BIP that gets rid of the "we're going to call the police" part.
Well, I think first of all that you have to go back and revisit that functional behavioral assessment and make sure that the functional behavioral assessment has done a really good job of identifying the underlying causes or conditions behind the behavior. And then understand that the most effective behavioral strategy in the BIP is to teach children alternative ways of behaving. So I would also ask, what are the skills that they're trying to teach the child? If they're, what they really are talking about is kind of the crisis plan or the plan to de-escalate the behavior. So there should be a de-escalation plan or a crisis plan, and I refer to it as a de-escalation plan because I think that really is the goal. But there should be a de-escalation plan in place that is written down, that people have rehearsed, that everyone knows what to do. I think it sounds like this child and the school team are in crisis, and so they probably need some help to work through that crisis, but to really look at, what is it that the child needs to do differently? What are the factors that are contributing to the behavior? Are staff trained in handling the behavior? How are they triggering the behavior? Are they actually doing the behavior intervention plan? So behavior intervention plans are really individualized. So there's not one set that fits them all. If you go to the Indiana Resource Center for Autism website, there actually is an article about crisis management that they might want to revisit, and I will type this in.
Well, I would like to know why the police are called for a child. What's the incident that brought that up? I don't know how to evaluate it unless I know what actually happened.
Well, I think Cathy's answer is a really good one. So it's all right, Cathy, and we only have another 5 minutes.
Can you tell me her answer, because I'm getting so much static I can't hear it.
Okay, well, I think she did a good job with that answer. And Eustacia, I would like you to address a couple of more things before we only have about 5 more minutes, and then we're just going to go to questions, although we've been getting some questions that are really good. And we will, people have asked about Cathy's headset, and I apologize, and Cathy does too. But now we know it's a learning experience for all of us. I think it worked as well as we could possibly hope that it would work. And we've just one little minor thing. Couldn't hear Cathy very good. Next time we do it, we may have people use telephones, so we avoid that completely. Eustacia, you have talked about the fact that, and I love this picture. I don't know if you can see it or not, Eustacia. Can you see that picture of you in Temple?
No, I can't, but yes, I can there in the back, and I know the picture, yes.
Yes. So you're both using the same mannerism, and you have often said that one of the reasons Temple was successful in life is because her autism was there, but there were also other genetic factors. And I don't think people should forget that with their children. The autism isn't the only thing about their child that we're dealing with. So Temple being strong-willed and persistent, I don't think that came from autism. I think she's got a mom.
I don't either. I think that's character. I think that's character. Yes. And one of the points that I believe in, that impresses me most about her, was building her own cattle equipment. And this is, again, in the days before women's lib. And the men at the meat factory wanted to destroy her work because she was a woman. And Temple guarded it. She went and stayed in a crummy little motel cabin for 2 weeks, getting up early in the morning, getting there, and standing guard over her equipment so these men would not destroy it, which would have cost the company thousands of dollars. They didn't care. They didn't want a woman to win. Now that's character, and I think it's an extraordinary example of character. And this is the part of Temple that I love most. By gum, she wasn't going to let them hurt her work. Good for her.
And I think she got that. You have other children who are also strong-willed, you might say?
Yes, and they're all talented. They're all smart and talented, and I have 5 grandsons who seem to be going on their own road, too. So I'm very lucky.
Yes, and so I think that is always an important point when you bring up that Temple has autism, but Temple also has a lot of other stuff going into making Temple, and I think that's true for all children. There's a lot more to them than just the autism, and we need to find those other things.
We need to look at what they can do, not always at what they can't do.
And I also want to show a picture again of your book, Thorn in My Pocket, and if people are interested in this, they can go to Future Horizons, I guess, that website, or just email us directly, and we will help them purchase that book. That's a bit of an advertisement for your book, but it's a great book, and a lot of things you talk about are there.
Thank you.
So,
well, I'm working on another one now. I'm working on one on the social history of autism, because I think we're not looking at our role in the picture. And as I've gone back hundreds of years, I found this is an old problem. There's nothing new about autism. But each time, these children have thrown us off. And so therefore, we make decisions and judgments because we're uncomfortable. And I think if we looked at this more clearly, we would see, as you say, what they can do, not what they can't do. And then everybody's nervous system would quiet down, theirs and ours. And that there not be us and them, but us and us.
Right. We have another question for Cathy, and good sound or bad sound, I'm going to ask you to address this. It says, since autism has its own learning style, should we be urging schools to have special autism units rather than one self-contained classroom? Cathy, I'm going to let you take that away if you don't mind, because you know how I feel.
I actually am typing a response. I'm actually typing a response to it.
Okay.
And part of my response was, I was just in a school this week, in a general education school, and the principal and the staff are so amazing that what you see are the students with autism in the general education setting doing amazingly well. And I think, you know, I hope that we can continue to build capacity in our schools so children don't have just segregated options, but they have options in their school community. In our state, in Indiana, we've trained close to 400 teams, and we have autism leaders in each of our special education planning districts. So we've really looked at how we send kids someplace based on their label, but how we provide opportunities for kids in a whole variety of places. Sometimes it's really not in the best interest of children to all be together with children who are just like them. They need to be amongst their peers, and their peers need to be amongst them so that they know how to support their friends with autism once they get into the community. So, but I'm also typing a response, Chris.
Okay, and I think Eustacia, you never segregated Temple in her early years. I think she did go to a special school in high school, but not in her early years.
Not in her early years. In her early years, she went to the little local country day school with everybody else. And that made her part of the community and the neighborhood. It was valuable.
And the children learned to tolerate her differences, you might say?
And also because she was also inventive. She had good ideas, and they liked that. And she made those kites that would fly up in the air behind the bicycle. Well, they all wanted a kite that would fly back of their bicycle, and Temple made them. And they liked putting on shows, she and her sister. So everybody else in the neighborhood, they wanted to be part of the show, too. She had a lot.
And Eustacia, how much did you much did you take part in those putting on the shows? I mean, where was your support for that?
Oh, well, first place, they saw me in a show, and that was what turned them on to it, because I was playing a mermaid, and I think, as I've told you before, when they saw their mother, they turned into this glittering green creature. They thought, well, they'd like to be turned into something glittering too. And went home, and we began to have costumes and makeup and sheets pulled across the bedroom and lots of leading characters and not much plot. They weren't interested in plot. They were interested in performing. But you can't just do this with your sister. And so the other children in the neighborhood would come in on it. And then as they got older, I began to do much more serious plays, particularly with Temple's sister, who was seriously talented theatrically. And even then, when Temple wanted to join them, when we were doing Molière, I said, Temple, can you do exactly what I tell you? Because if you don't, I'm going to kill you. And she said, I'll do exactly what you want. Exactly. I just want to do it with them. So these things all united us.
And I think, again, Eustacia, that the amount of time you spent making sure your child, creating things where Temple could be a part of the event, but you also had to put up with all the neighborhood kids and everything, all that. And I'm sure that, there were things that you didn't do because you were spending time doing community theater in your backyard.
Well, yes. And then there were times when I was careless with my children because I was doing something on my own. And that's the story of life. You go back and you think, oh, I really was careless then. You'll do some choices. And you're going to make some bad choices. You think, whoops, I just plain forgot. That's the story of parenthood. All children, not just children on the spectrum.
Okay, so if anyone has any other questions, and I'm at a total disadvantage because for some reason I didn't set up my computer right. I can't see if you're raising hands, and I don't know if Ruth can see that. So I'm going to step away from my computer, go into another room. You won't be able to see me anymore. But
Chris, I've been answering.
What?
Chris, I've been answering all the questions.
Okay.
I've been answering questions as they've been coming in.
All right, this is great. Does anyone else have any other questions? This is a good time to do it. Just type in your question, and we will see if you have any questions for Eustacia. Anything you want to know? This is a great time to ask her. And if you don't ask any questions from Eustacia, I'm going to put up a couple of quotes that Eustacia really likes and ask her to talk about those. So maybe, Eustacia, if you could read that quote, The Window of Opportunity, and while we're waiting for any questions to come in.
Yeah, wait till I put on my glasses. Do you want me to wait for you to put it up? Are you up?
I think it's up there. Can you not see it? Yes, it should be there.
I can't see it. No. Oh, okay. I won't worry about it. If Oliver, can you see it? Well, I don't see. Are there questions there that I'm not seeing?
Yeah, there is.
Wait a minute. Here's a question.
Scroll.
No, I think
okay,
I don't
gracious.
think
I'm not seeing the questions.
Oh, hey, guess what?
What?
I found you.
There
guys.
are questions.
I found you. No,
Oh.
Cathy's been answering the questions, and she's doing a good job with that. And now, do you see the window of opportunity? Autism reminds us. Do you see that on your screen, Eustacia?
No. Do I?
Yes. Oliver, does she see that?
No.
How about if we just read this?
I'll just read it.
Sorry.
Shall I?
Yes.
What I said
reminds
was,
us.
yes, and this is a quote from Dr. V.S. Ramachandran, who's a medical bioneurological researcher. He says, autism reminds us that the uniquely human sense of self is not an airy nothing without habitation and name. The self actually emerges from a reciprocity of interacts with others. I like that quote, and I also like Matt Ridley, who's a scientist and a journalist, and he says that because of the way their promoters, that's the genes promoters, the way their promoters switch on and off in response to external instruction, genes are very far from being fixed in their actions. Instead, they are devices for extracting information from the environment. Every minute, every second, the pattern of genes being expressed in your brain changes, often in direct or indirect response to events outside the body. Genes are the mechanism for experience, and we are the window of opportunity. External instruction is us, parents, doctors, teachers, therapists. It may not be perfect. It may not even be complete, but it will be there. And in the process, we too will grow.
I like that, Eustacia. Do we have any comments on that?
Anybody got a comment? Are there questions that I'm not reading here that I should be reading?
And I will read them to you, Eustacia, if they come up, so don't you worry about that.
Okay. Oh, no, we did answer that one.
Yep, they've all
Yes.
been answered so far.
Thanks.
And I think this has gone very well, except for a little bit. Oh, here's another question.
Okay, what?
Eustacia, this is a good one for you. What are your thoughts about the new 1 in 68 children being diagnosed with autism? What do you think about that?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one. For one thing, we've always had autism, far more than we realize. They were absorbed better, and they were also hidden better. And we also had activities that they could be included in that were better. Farming. You know, there were, I'm sure, lots of boys where the farming families just said, well, he don't talk, he milks the cows. And I think of the days when we had sailing ships, and we still use the expression, to know the ropes. If you're going to be in a bad storm, those sailing masts were 3 stories high. I'd rather send an Asperger boy up there. He will know the ropes and save everybody's life. So we have that element in there. We don't have the same kind of available jobs today. I think we also are suffering from pollution in our planet. There's pollution in umbilical cords, and we better worry about that. We also, I think of one doctor who said to me, don't really like these fertility drugs. Why am I seeing so many twins? And one of them's autistic. So we have elements that are feeding in. We also have a generation that are having their children later, which is completely understandable because we have a very complicated culture and they don't feel ready to have children. But the postponement is not always a good idea. Mother Nature meant us to have our children in our 20s, not in our 40s. And this is particularly true of dads. I haven't got the quote here in front of me about dads, but those dads, the odds are not good. You see, a woman is born with all the eggs she has when she's born. A man, his gonads keep making new spermatozoa all the time. And as they get older, that begins to be like a bad Xerox. They have changed more than over 450 times by 40. That's by 50, it's turned into 800 times. And there are studies that are indicating that this is not good. So my advice to everybody is better have your kids when you're young. That means that you're going to have to call the grandparents into service, and I believe in grandparent service. I have 5 grandsons, and I'm terribly pleased that I see they now are turning to me for certain questions. So there's a role in there for the older generation. Have we any other thoughts to cover?
I don't know. What if, you know what? We've got 3 more minutes, and then, 2 more minutes. So I think we better just say goodbye to everybody. Let them know that in 2 weeks we're going to have Travis, and how do you say his last name, Eustacia?
Epps. E-P-E-S.
Travis. Why don't you tell a little bit about him so people can sign up for that, and we'll check our audio out
I think you'd enjoy listening to him. I have served on the UJA Autism Committee here in New York City, and one of the things that I've been impressed with on that board is this is the only organization I know that looks at other organizations and assesses them. Everybody on that committee has a child on the spectrum, and that includes Travis. Travis has been running that. Travis has also been part of a panel working with mixed marriages here in New York City, Jewish and WASP marrying each other, which works out, but sometimes is difficult. So I'm impressed with the way he looks at life and his generosity of spirit, his wisdom.
And he started an organization
and I look forward
called
to talking
Ability
to
Dream.
him.
Yeah. So he started an organization called Ability Dream for adults with autism. Right. And so he's going to talk about that. And then the following week we don't have anyone scheduled. Might bring Cathy back in, and because there seem to be a lot of things that
and
Cathy
we're going to get her a new headset.
About. Yeah. Well, we're going to figure out what's going on with that. Maybe it'll happen again. And then we will bring in Sally Burton-Hoyle, who's going to talk about siblings on the 2 weeks after that. So check out our website, the TGEC website, and that should pop up when we're done. And please sign up for more of these. And Eustacia, you may now do your official goodbye.
Who's head of the we're going to talk also to Cathy Lord, who's head now of the Brain Institute here in New York. It's located in White Plains, but it's very much connected to the medical situation here in New York, and she too will be valuable. We have a good list, and we're going to get more.
So would you like to officially close the conversation, Eustacia? Say goodbye to everyone?
Yes, goodbye, and thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to your questions. Think about it. Send in your questions. We will watch for them on the website, and we'll be able to bring them in, talk about them. Because I believe in shared insight. That's what all of this is really about. Good luck to you all, and thank you for joining us.